Okay. Good morning. Thank you for allowing us to be here. Thank you, Professor Tan, for the introduction and the inspiring words as we think about the situation that Singapore and Singapore industry find itself in, that we all in the global economy find ourselves in, honestly. So what I'm going to try to do is share some of our thinking about what lean thinking is, what it means, and what it could mean here in Singapore. It is an interesting phrase, the VUCA world. This was dreamed up by the American military. I think it's actually a metaphor that does apply to just the volatility that we all face. It's always been here, really. But sometimes in years past, we could ignore, we could think that there was stability. We could pretend and fool ourselves that it was there, but actually those unknowns were always out there. There was always volatility, always a lot of unknowns. It's a complex world. It's always been a complex world. And how we can then move forward by understanding and grasping that ambiguity, not rejecting that, pretending it's not there, make that a part of the way we perceive the world and then respond and adapt to it. I found this recently in some of my preparation for coming here. I think you all know this individual, Mr. Lim Swee Say, as he was talking about leadership in a VUCA world and the need to adapt and learn. And I think this is indeed what we have to do. I think there are questions then of how we do that. How do we adapt and learn? How do we learn and adapt? And I think that strikes to the core of what lean thinking is really all about. So that's what I'll share with you over the next few minutes. Here is a definition of what lean thinking in practice is. A lot of words. I apologize for that. We can read them along together. But it's about transforming. It's about change. People often like to say that, well, we humans don't like change. And I don't even know what that means. From the moment we're born, change is what happens every moment. Every moment we're faced with it. So we don't like change that we don't like. I believe that's true. But rather than wish things weren't changing and wish we could have this lack of volatility, those are just what we call pipe dreams. That's not reality. Change is always here. What we need is an effective way to think about that, and effective means by which we can approach the change that comes at us. Lean is indeed about, first of all, transforming material or motion into value. So when you think of lean production, I think that means taking stuff, taking resin, taking metal, and creating something from that. We're transforming. We're doing a material transformation. That's what every worker out on the factory floor does. And as we go about doing lean in factories, we eliminate waste so that everything that's being done on the factory floor, instead of being wasteful, too much inventory, things of that sort, every motion is applied to transforming that material. But beyond the factory floor, we can think of that in terms of any motion. It's so easy to confuse motion for value. If we're all busy, we feel like, oh, okay, that we feel good about that. But of the motion that we're undertaking, that includes motion that takes place here, inside, in between our ears. How much of that is contributing to creating value? So this strikes to the core of what lean thinking is. So here's some words for you. Lean is about creating ever more pure value with ever declining amounts of resources. And we're going to do that through developing the capabilities of everyone, front lines, all the way up through the organization, all the way up to the CEO. CEOs still need to be developed too. CEOs are still learning also. CEOs are people too. And we're going to be learning as we develop our capabilities how to improve flow, how can we take time out so the value can flow faster. How can we eliminate waste that enables that to happen? Essentially applying science to our work, applying scientific thinking to our work. We often don't think of someone working on an assembly line, for example, as a scientist. We want to have everyone approaching every moment of their work with scientific thinking. Now, there may be some leaders in the political environment in the United States that you've heard of recently who work at a more instinctive or instinctual basis. We think still we want to bring scientific thinking to everything we do. I'm not ready to reject science just yet. So lean thinking is very much about transforming our organizations and ourselves. It's one and the same thing. It's not just how I do the work of perhaps assembling one of these, a clicker. It's how I approach that. It's how I think about that. So what is this thing that we call lean? Where did it come from? I thought I would kind of go back in time a little bit with us. Lean production was named 25 years ago. The essence of it wasn't born just 25 years ago. It's older than that. But that's where the word came from an MIT study where they spent 5 years in the 1980s studying the global automotive industry. That research was led by the founder of the Lean Enterprise Institute, James Womack, who was here last year. And that resulted in a book called The Machine That Changed the World. I guess I would be curious to know, in this room of over 500 people, we have standing room only, how many of you have read the book, The Machine That Changed the World? If you wouldn't mind raising your hands and we could see a show of hands. Okay, and I'm going to make this yes or no. I'm going to make this sure that everyone participates. How many of you have not read the book, The Machine That Changed the World? Okay, so you were not sleeping when you didn't raise your hand. So that's interesting. Had I asked that question some years ago, it would have been the reverse. What we just saw was that 10% have read the book, 90% have not. And that's okay, it's an older book. But the concepts, the principles that are outlined in the book are profound. It was named as one of the most influential business books of the 20th century. We're now the 21st century. But those insights came essentially from the work of the global MIT team. And they didn't name it in the book, but they were talking about the Toyota Production and Management System. So there's been a global exchange of technologies over the history of the industrial world. And the lean production and technology transfer was from Japan to the United States. Kind of in the 80s, there was a book that some of you may remember from the 1970s called Japan as Number One, written by a Harvard professor. It was very influential to me in the mid-1970s when I was a student at the University of Tennessee. And this book came out, and at that time, in the United States, there was tremendous fear of the global economy that was starting to now become so volatile. Tremendous fear, and this book, Japan is Number One, sparked even greater fear. So I read this book, I met this professor, and decided, well, that sounds interesting. I'll go to Japan. I'll go to the heart of the beast and see what this is all about. Now, at that time, I had never, when I graduated college, Singapore is so wonderful to me. It's such an international environment. And to be able to live here your entire life, I've always been so very envious. When I graduated college, I had never met a Japanese person. When I went to Japan, I did not know a single word of Japanese, even konnichiwa. I had never had a bite of sushi when I went to Japan. I got off the plane and I visited Nissan and Fujitsu and a bunch of companies. Turns out I visited the same Nissan plant as Deng Xiaoping, the same month that he visited there, and then went to outside Shenzhen just a few weeks later to pronounce the opening of China to the global economic winds that we've all been a part of in the last couple of decades. So at the end of the 1980s, as I was in Japan working for Toyota, MIT was conducting its study that eventually became so influential. Now, at that time, I had no idea that MIT was doing any kind of study. I was working for Toyota only because they had decided to also accept this global economy in a different way. Globalization has been the biggest challenge facing Toyota, the entire auto industry, and now we know every industry for several decades now. One strength of Toyota was that it recognized its weaknesses and said, we do not know how to deal with this. So they also decided to go to the heart of the beast. Said, we will open an operation in the United States with our biggest competitor as a joint venture partner, that was General Motors, and with the union, with the UAW union. So they decided to create a 50-50 joint venture in California. This was the early 1980s. And at that time, I was in Japan, And I wanted to work for the biggest, most Japanese company I could find. As far as I knew, all Japanese companies were the same, and they were all wonderful. They were all perfect. That's what I thought. And so as I was looking to work for the biggest, most Japanese company I could find, I began knocking on doors in Japan, trying to get a job. And very quickly, I was met by every company with a look of bewilderment. What are you doing here looking for a job? Didn't anyone tell you we Japanese companies don't hire foreigners? And I literally knocked on doors for months, but I was determined. I was going to stay a couple of years and learn what I could. And after months of getting turned down and having doors slammed in my face and running out of money, when I got to Toyota, whereas everyone else had slammed the door in my face, they kind of grabbed me. They knocked on the door. They took one look. I said, "What?" And then grabbed me by the collar, pulled me inside the room, slammed the door behind me, locked the door, said, "You'll be the one American to work with us on this side of the Pacific to help us figure out how to transfer our system overseas." So they acknowledged they didn't know how to do that. Of course, I had no clue how to do it either. But it's perfect for me because before I could help them do this, they had to kind of teach me first. And being a smart American, they would ask me questions about how to do things in the United States. And being a smart young American, I would answer. I was not being a good scientist. I felt that I needed to be right. And one of the things I've learned over the years about lean thinking is to be humble. When you don't know, say you don't know. And that's what a scientist does. That's something we can all do. We may not all have a test tube every moment we're doing our work, but we can be a scientist. So my education there began at that point, trying to help them. It was me and 70,000 Japanese trying to figure out how to transfer this Toyota production and management system to the United States. As it turns out, much of that technology, that know-how, had gone from the United States to Japan decades earlier. I didn't know that at the time. This shows a couple of books, a couple of very important books. One is called Training Within Industry, which was a means of training a workforce to be able to do their job and to be problem solvers. As I was trying to figure out, helping Toyota, how to take their training to develop people to the United States, along the way I found out that this book, which is a very thick training manual, was exactly what Toyota was still using. They had received it from the Americans in the late 1940s. They were still using it exactly as it was in the 1980s. Another thing that went from the United States to Japan that Toyota picked up on was you probably have not heard about training within industry, perhaps, but you probably have heard about Edwards Deming and the quality techniques that he introduced to Japan again in the late 40s. Especially, he introduced something that became known as Pdca, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Now, how many of you have heard of Plan, Do, Check, Act, Pdca? You know what's coming. How many of you have not heard of Plan, Do, Check? Okay, I did not get 100% participation that time. How many of you have not heard of Pdca? Okay, how many of you have heard of Pdca? Thank you, thank you. That was about 90% have, about 10% haven't. Now, a lot of people think, it's amazing how people still think lean is all about cars and factories. Do you know where Pdca came from? Bell Labs. It was born in the laboratory. This was a process for scientists to use so they could ensure great quality as they were doing their work in the laboratory. That's where it came from. And that's what went from the United States to Japan and then to Toyota. Plan, Do, Check, Act. Have a plan, give it a try, study, reflect, and then adjust and standardize. They call that ACT. That word adjust comes up here. It's going to come back again in just a few moments. Now, this is an eye chart. I will not go through all of this. But what this indicates with a timeline from about 100 years ago, about 1910 to now, and there's been a steady evolution of thinking as we have all collectively in the industrial world tried to figure all this out. How can we be more effective and more efficient as organizations? It's an unending challenge. It's not going to end in my lifetime, I don't think, and I don't think it will in yours either. That is both something then that gives us humility, but also can give us heart, because this is simply a challenge to move forward. That's all. So this shows a funnel with many influences coming to Toyota until about the time it really took off to develop its systems, and that was 1950. And for about 30 years, there was an incubation right there in Toyota City. You know, Toyota is such a unique company even in Japan. When I joined them in 1983, all my Japanese friends in Tokyo said, "Oh, that company is so weird. Even we Japanese think it's strange. It's so Japanese, so very, very Japanese." So I went there to study that, to learn about that as an employee. But all those things that we know about it had been cooking there in a place called Toyota City for 30 years. Even inside the country of Japan, they didn't go outside of Toyota City. All the suppliers, everything was right there in this very small area. It was a hotbed of a certain kind of innovation that took all these influences, all these industrial influences, all these scientific influences, all these social science influences to create what we now think of as lean thinking. And then in the 1980s, it began to funnel out to the United States and to elsewhere around the world. So this book, The Machine That Changed the World, has since that time, when it was talking about the auto industry is now, in 2017, unrecognizable from the auto industry that was described in this book. Unrecognizable. At that time, the gap between Toyota and the rest of the industry was like this. That's not the case anymore. I don't know if I have any Toyota friends in the audience. If I do, you may not be happy. When I say that if you look at a Camry and a Chevrolet Malibu and a Nissan Maxima, there's not a lot of difference between those cars, I'm sorry. Maybe there's still some, and there's a quality difference, and Toyota still is at the top. But the difference in terms of competitiveness in that industry is just remarkable in a few decades. No one could have predicted that. From the auto industry, it went to all kinds of discrete manufacturing. Anytime you're making something like this, or something like this, the iPhone. From there to places like construction, to process industries, to healthcare. We had a chance, we're going to hear more today about an application in healthcare. It's amazing to me seeing this in factories in Japan in the 1980s and see how this has exploded in the global healthcare industry. It's a wonderful thing to see. And also the service sectors. Right now, if you read the newspapers, the business papers in the US right now, the disruption that's happening in the US retail industry is remarkable. It's basically what's happening in retail now is what happened in the auto industry back in the 1980s. And it's what woke up the healthcare industry about 10 years ago. And then knowledge work. We tend to think of lean as applying only to factory work, but no. Again, it was born in the laboratory. It applies to knowledge work as well. So we want to all be thinking as scientists. It sounds simple. Eliminate waste, right? A lot of simple ideas and things that we can do. But simple does not mean easy. And to transform into the way we work today as an organization or even as an individual, it's not so easy. What we often find is we start off at a certain level and we find some low-hanging fruit, we can improve a lot, and then we plateau. And at that point, there's the challenge. What do we do? Do we continue to improve, accept the challenge, or do we fall back? Do we backslide, as we say? And we've learned a few things about organizations and how they work over the last a couple of decades. One thing we can say is that lean is a social and technical system, not just a technical system. It's not just how to do the work with least waste. It's a social system as well. We think in terms of purpose, process, and people. And the word, the term that's used in research about that then is social technical system. We'd like everything to be in perfect balance, but what we know that things in the world are very not often in a perfect balance. It's how to find that balance in a dynamic way in the face of constant change that becomes our challenge. So lean is a technical system. How to do the work, how to design the product, how to then build the product and sell the product. It's absolutely a technical system. We need to think about the work. So we teach the art and craft of science. Science actually does have an art to it. And it has a craft to it. The greatest scientists are wonderful craftspersons. And science will always give us a good technical answer. I think we have some engineers here in the room. Engineers tend to think that if we have the right technical answer, well, that should win the day. If I just lay out the good technical argument. But we know that that's not the case. Being technically right is only half the battle. And on the other hand, there are a lot of organizations that you see heavily weighted this way, heavily social. A lot of healthcare organizations are this way. You can't make a decision unless everyone fully agrees. And you sit in a room and nothing can be decided. And we still feel good about ourselves and we go about our days without improvement ever occurring. A lot of organizations are like this. And you see organizations that go back and forth. I know some that are heavily social, some heavily technical, and over time they kind of go back and forth like this. What we want, of course, is to have everything in balance. We can only do that by active role of management and leadership with a solid foundation of purpose of why we're here. Back to the animation that we showed a minute ago. What is our purpose? Why do we exist as an organization? If that is not clear, we don't think we can make successful progress toward achieving our aims. So the video, the animation we just saw, is intended to point out that our failure mode is going to be somewhere in here. As the narration mentioned, there's no 10-step program that takes you to the perfect lean enterprise. I wish there was. But one of the things that I'm pretty convinced of now, after doing this for 30-plus years, there's not a perfect 10-step or 12-step program to do that. It's a matter, instead of here's what you should do, here's the solution, here are the right steps, it's a matter of being a scientist. And what does a scientist do? A scientist asks questions. The scientific revolution was not about the discoveries of how things work. The scientific revolution was about humans finally admitting that we don't know everything, that there are things we don't know, but there is a means by which we can learn those things, and that is science, the scientific method. So that's what we think we need to bring to our thinking and our approach to how to change our organization. Not copy the best practices, not copy a set of steps, of 10 or 12 steps that the consultant may tell you is the right thing to do, but to ask the questions that can only apply to your organization. Then you define what your organization needs to be on your own terms, not simply trying to be like Toyota. So this slide, the top part of it there, I showed a little bit earlier when we were looking at the book, The Machine That Changed the World. So a little bit more about that. So we think that lean is an approach to achieving your purpose and solving problems that are in the way of you achieving your purpose at every level of the organization. Lean does not mean downsizing or simple cost cutting, although cost cutting, cost reduction is absolutely a result of what we do. We're going to be more effective, we're going to be more efficient, we're going to be more productive. But what it really means is learning every step along the way. That means as an organization, and that means every single individual. Every single individual includes the CEO, it includes the secretary, it includes the people that are doing the work on the front lines of producing products. It means improving, it means being adaptive so we can sustain the improvements that we achieve. That should, to me anyway, make me recall again these words about adapting and learning and how that relates to a VUCA world, a world of volatility and ambiguity. So this transformation framework that we shared through the animation, what we do with that is do a deep dive into each one of those questions. There's the high-level question, what is your purpose? What problem to solve? We break those down and go deeper and deeper into each one of the questions. With today's theme of leadership in a VUCA world, we're really talking about this center part of the transformation framework house, which is what is the role of leadership and what management system can be supportive of leadership, can be supportive of developing the capability that can enable our organizations to adapt to changing circumstances. Sorry. So leadership in a VUCA world. One suggestion that I'll offer that reflects our learnings about lean thinking over the years is that lean is not merely a matter of turning people loose. There are a lot of organizations in my country, the U.S., that kind of think that's what it's about. Everyone is good, everyone has a good heart. Turn them loose and they'll do the right thing. Well, turn them loose and they'll want to do the right thing. But I don't know if you've ever had children. Some of you are. Some of you either have had teenagers or you maybe still are a teenager. You used to be a teenager. A lot of teenagers, including my own, wanted to do the right thing. But didn't necessarily know how to do that. So it's not, I don't believe, it's just a matter of turning people loose. It's a matter of a little bit more than that. We don't just expect or hope that their natural goodness and creativity will emerge to carry forward to all of us as an organization achieving our dreams. Nor is it the opposite extreme of ordering people to do your bidding, to give them, here's the 10-step program to become lean, now go do this. It's not that either. But it's never, if life were one of these easy extremes, it would be easier. But no, it's not. We have to recognize that there's some truth in each of those and how we mix. It's not just a matter of finding the place in the middle either. It's how those mix together. And we have to understand our circumstance to see how those mix together in our condition. Now, one of the things that I was introduced to when I joined Toyota many years ago, when I joined Toyota in 1983, There was nothing written in English about the Toyota production system. We didn't have the word lean. And there was almost nothing written even in Japanese. So my Japanese teachers would show me manga or cartoons or drawings, and we would talk about what it meant. And then we would go do something, try something, and then talk about what it meant, and I would make my own notes. This is an early image, one that I think is still really, I think it's a useful image. What we want is not individual efficiency, but total system efficiency. What you can see there, these are rowboats. If you've ever done rowing, it's an amazing sport. Because as a member of a team, you cannot try to row harder than your teammates. You can't try to row faster than your teammates. It's really a sport that forces you to synchronize and to work with teamwork. It's an amazing thing. But how you can learn to go faster when I can't just go faster than you. So you can see the rowboat there in the middle, and you can see the one rower is going faster than the others. And what's going to happen is it's not going to help. Not only is it not going to help, it's actually going to hurt. And the suggestion here is the same thing applies in our organizations. We need, through teamwork, to be rowing together if we want to achieve success as an organization. But this also shows, as you can tell, very smooth waters. And the fact is, the world is not usually consisting of such smooth waters. Here's another graphic that I was taught or shown back 35 or so years ago. That the key to sustainable improvement in any organization, basically the challenge is this. The black line there that's shifting around is our demand, or how we want to provide value to our customers, to the market. And it's always changing, it always will change. So again, VUCA has always been there. We can pretend that no, it's a stable thing, but actually you never know what that customer is going to do tomorrow. They can call up and want more, or they can cancel and they're gone. You never know what patient is going to walk into the emergency room. Someone can walk in and you cannot predict that. You don't know. We can try, and we can try to understand our demand as well as possible, but it's always going to shift. So a couple of Japanese words there. One of them is famous, called muda, and that means waste. And so lean is famous for eliminating waste or eliminating muda. But inside Toyota, we never talked about that term alone. There were always three M words. There was muda, which is having excess, where there's waste. But there's also muri, which means overburdening the organization. And there's also mura, which means fluctuation, or volatility, or ambiguity, VUCA. That's exactly what mura is. And that's always been there, always will be there. So what we want to try to do as much as we can is be able to counter the instability by knowing our demand, but then understand our capabilities, which is not so easy, actually. How much capability do I really have in my organization, in the factory, in the office? It's not so easy to know. It sounds like a trivial thing. And then create the flexibility, the adaptability, to get those to match. And of course, it'll never happen perfectly. So what we're talking about is trying to be a little more like the smooth rowboat in the face of a reality that's full of VUCA. That's what we're trying to do. And my conclusion, I think, at this point is we never achieve that state perfectly. So we need to accept the fact that it's not going to be achieved perfectly, and then how can we adapt ourselves, to be accepting that and dealing with that. That then takes us back to exactly this. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a process for dealing with VUCA? Not just a wish, not just a dream, not just, yes, we need to adapt. Yes, we know we need to adapt. How can we do that? What's a process for doing that? That's what is at the heart of lean thinking. That's what Pdca is a process by which we can deal with VUCA, instability. So plan, do, check, act. That means having a hypothesis or some idea, some expectation. When I embark on any big activity or even something small, what do I think is going to happen? What's my prediction? From there, how can I run some trials quickly, easily, low cost? And then learn from those each step along the way, pause and do a deep check and reflection, and then I can act by putting things into standardization, or I can adjust, or I can abandon as appropriately. So going through this effectively and quickly becomes the key to lean thinking. It becomes the key to having a leadership and business systems that can live successfully in a world of VUCA. So we like to think about innovation, and we like to think about how our organizations can move forward in that way. Something to share with you. So I worked in Toyota City for Toyota for 5 years, 1983 to 1988. I worked for them another 5 years after that in the United States. And it was an amazing time of learning for me. And in my 5 years in Toyota City, almost never, ever was I given a solution. An interesting thing about that is that it took me 3 years to notice it. I was busy, I was doing things, and then one day I went to my boss and said, "This is interesting. I've been here for 3 years, and you've never told me just exactly what to do." And yet I also knew I wasn't free to just do what I wanted at all. Not at all. I was given a number of things, so I'm working in a certain direction. And when I started to realize this, it kept me awake at night. I said, well, how on earth, what's going on? How does this even work? And he said to me something that I'll never forget. It was a deep lesson. He said, I would like to tell you what to do sometimes because you often do the wrong thing. But whenever you tell someone what to do, you take the responsibility for that action away from them. Why did you do that? You told me to. And we know, in the case of VUCA, we're not going to know as much about any given situation as the person doing the work. They're out there minding the machine. They're selling the product, dealing with the employee that's a problem. They know things that you don't. So 3 things can happen when you tell someone exactly what to do. One is you take the responsibility away. Another is you deprive them of the opportunity to think. Another thing that might happen is they just might do it, and you might have been wrong. And in the case of VUCA, constant volatility, yes, we will be wrong. If I try to order all 500 people here exactly when you're going to get in line for lunch later, I'm probably going to get it all wrong. I'm going to have to find a means by which we understand the objective, all have lunch within a certain amount of time, and there's a process by which we can organize ourselves. So here's what happened instead. I wasn't just turned free to do whatever I wanted, back to the previous example of what we do not do. I was given clear responsibility to propose solutions to problems that I owned. And my bosses would do everything they could not to take that ownership away. Sometimes they would. Sometimes my boss would tell me what to do. But when he did, we both knew that both he and I had failed. And that happened. But we both knew that we had failed. What he's trying to do instead is coach me so I can learn to see the same solution that he could see. So that's my challenge in the same way when dealing with my employees today. So that says a lot about leadership if you accept that, right? And you're free to accept it. I'm up here giving you ideas that are based on some experience, but you can believe what you wish. You all will. All 500 of you will. But if you accept that idea just for a moment, that has some radical things to say about the way we lead and manage, I would suggest. If we think of those extremes I mentioned a moment ago, think of one of those as the dictator or the leader who says, do what I say, I'll decide. And I've known many of those, and sometimes they're quite effective, especially for a while. But what's going to happen in terms of getting the ownership, the engagement of each individual to solve their problems? You're going to take that ownership away, right? On the other hand, if we tell people, oh, it's up to you, you decide. If you succeed, good for you, maybe a bonus. If you don't succeed, that's bad for you. Maybe you're fired. Maybe you're not promoted. So easy, so easy. No, that's not going to get us where we want to go either. It might feel good, but that's not going to get us where we go. Instead, we need something that's much more engaged. It's not laissez-faire. It's something that says, follow me. I don't know exactly how we're going to get where we're going, but we're going to figure it out together. We're going to have a common understanding of where we want to go and how we're going to work together, and we're going to figure out the specifics together. So what does that look like? What does that mean? It looks something like this, where we're going to identify, future objectives, a vision, if you will. And we know that between here and there, a lot of things are going to happen. That VUCA is going to come at us, the volatility, the ambiguity, the complexity is going to come at us in ways that we cannot predict. So what we can do, though, is design Pdca actions and experiments along the way so that we can learn our way to the future that we want to actualize. I suggest that that's what we have to do, is learn our way to the future that we mutually want. And Pdca, or lean thinking, is a way we can do that. I have a couple of people here today, I think from this company, Lego. I admire this company. I've never visited this company. I don't know, I don't really know anything about them. I love the product, though. You get little blocks. How many of you know this, the story of the last 12 or 14 years of Lego? What they do today is the same thing they did 30 years ago, which is they make these little plastic blocks, that's all. And it's remarkable to me, you can get a plastic block that was made 30 years ago and one that was made last week, and they fit together perfectly. It's incredible. And they will tell you that they went through a profound transformation over these last 10 years, and yet they still do basically the same thing. They make these little blocks, that's all. But the CEO, who the first time for a non-family member, I believe, to be the CEO of Lego 12 years ago, started, as he came in, he was hired by the family to run the company because they realized the company was in trouble. It was lost. It had lost its sense of meaning, its vision of why it had lost its understanding of why it exists. So he began not with a 12-step program. Here's what we need to do. Here's my vision. We're going to do it. He started with the most profound of all questions. Why does Lego exist? Why does Lego exist? Why does the Lean Enterprise Institute exist? We're a spinoff of MIT. Why does MIT exist? That is a question that then we can address together. And that is a question we can use then not only to find the high-level visionary things of that sort, but every moment of work. If my job is to put one of these together every 30 seconds, I can give you the steps that you must follow to put this together, but I can also say, okay, your job, your responsibility is to make sure you produce one of these every 30 seconds. I'm going to give you a set of steps that we think works well enough, but your job is to find out what's wrong with those steps. Your job is to figure out what's wrong and how it can be made better. That's your job, not just to do the 15 steps to produce this. That's a radically different way of thinking about what a job is, and that's a way to make everyone a scientist. Not just the ones in the lab, not just the product development engineers, but everyone in the way they do their work is by asking those questions. So that makes us think of the leader then as a coach, so lean leader as coach. So the purpose then could be of leadership to develop capability through purposeful instruction. So if you don't know how to put this together, I have to teach you how. Here are the best practices we know of how one of these is put together. But I don't want you to just do that mindlessly like a robot from now on. I want you to think of how to do it better. Purposeful instruction when it's needed. Targeted questioning, not just vague, open questioning always, but targeted questioning and challenging counsel. I'm going to be challenging you on how you can do it better. If I say after 3 months you're doing this job and you're doing the exact same 15 steps, and you can say with pride, oh, I'm doing it exactly as you taught me 3 months ago. That's not what I want to hear. I want to hear that you made it better, because I know that there's a better way to do this. Challenging counsel to solve problems and continuously improve performance in achieving objectives. So here's an image of what the leader as coach might look like. It means that the leader is always thinking about the development of the capability in the organization. What kind of capabilities? The ones to do the job today, to perform these 15 tasks, or the capability to be able to think of how to do it better? That's the capability we want. If we're developing that kind of capability, that can even suffice us in the future. Even in the future. Not just doing today's work with today's technology, but to be thinking about how to do it better. That's the capabilities we need to be giving. Just as the university doesn't just teach the specific things you take in a course, they're teaching us how to think. What you learn in the university is you learn how to learn. You learn how to think. How can we build that into our work? So if we think of that as the key role, responsibility of a leader, again, it changes our sense of what a leader should do. We want to develop capability in doing the work, put this thing together. In solving problems, there will always be problems. Things will crop up. And to be steadily improving performance, climbing the hill. And a way we can do that, this is a characteristic of the lean approach to work, is we want to develop that capability not just in a classroom, not just through books, not through lectures, but through doing the work. We want to design the work in a way that could be a structure for learning as people do that work. By the way, one of the things we do as a Lean Institute is we publish some books. This happens to be our latest book. We just published, 2 weeks ago? It's called The Work of Management. And it lays out a way a management system can look in a given company. This happens to be a manufacturing company in the Midwest of the United States. And it's got this cycle to go around. And this cycle, we suggest, is a management system that you can think of as a scientific system to be able to both do the work and improve the work. We have work standards. You're able to see what the performance is, if we're achieving or not achieving those standards. And then we have some standard ways to approach those issues as they come up when we recognize we're not getting the performance that we wish that we want. So I'd like to thank Professor Tan for mentioning this book that I co-wrote some years ago called Learning to See. And there's a quote in there that became somewhat famous in Lean world called, "Every product or service has a value stream." The challenge lies in seeing that. There's so many things that happen in work, right? If I'm in a hospital, again, if I'm on a ward, I'm doing surgery, there are many things that are really critical path. These are the things we need to do, and all these other things are going on. How can we cut through all that to see the value stream and take out those things that are simply in the way? I think here's another quote that's an important one for us to think about what the heart of lean leadership is in a VUCA world, which is every situation has a problem. The challenge lies then in finding that. And that can't be done by one person, the senior leader. That has to be done by, if we were a group of a company of 500 plus people, I'd need every one of you being a problem finder, a problem investigator. I need every one of you to be a scientist, not just me deciding what you would do. The challenge lies in finding those problems in every situation. So Toyota, for example, is supposed to be a great company, very good at process engineering, right? They've been working on their processes of how to make a Corolla or a Camry now for decades. You'd think they'd be pretty good, right? I'm not sure if you know exactly how it works in a Toyota assembly line, but every worker is asked to flag and notice whenever they find a problem. And they're given a process to do that. They're taught how to see a problem. Every single worker on the assembly line, okay, high school graduates, they're taught how to find a problem. They're taught what to do once they've found a problem, which is to stop and notify. And after they notify, they know exactly what's going to happen, which is someone, management, is going to come provide them help. It's an amazing looks like a very simple thing. And inside that is an amazing social and technical system of how it works. And you might wonder, okay, if let's say in a Toyota factory, you have a few thousand workers, and every time they see a problem, they flag that and they notify that I found a problem. How often do you think a problem is being flagged and management is being notified that we found a problem in a Toyota assembly factory by assembly line workers? So I happen to have an answer for this. The last time I went to a Toyota factory and asked the question, how often is someone pulling the rope, that's what they call it, to notify? So just think for a moment what you think that answer might be. How often is someone in a Toyota assembly line finding a problem? This is the company that may be the best at process engineering of any company. I don't know, but maybe the best. So how often do you think someone is finding a problem and they're notifying? Thank you. So one possibility is every hour. Every hour for every worker? Maybe, maybe not. So the answer that I got the last time I asked this question in a Toyota assembly factory was, someone is notifying they found a problem 15,000 times per day. Now that's a shock and awe number. There's a lot of things to analyze and understand about that. But what I think the main takeaway is to recognize that everybody is having a problem all the time. The challenge lies in finding that, and then giving people the skills to respond to those problems. And we want them to respond not just by putting on a little fix, understand the problem and improve it and make it better and better over time. That's continuous improvement. And that's continuous improvement by everyone in the organization. So that means we need to think about how we develop that sort of capability. And that capability can serve us well even in this volatile future. All right, here's another example of a company that you may not know so well. There's an office furniture company in Michigan where I lived many years called Herman Miller. And the head of their lean initiative there says this: we aren't just solving problems, we're developing problem solvers. I think that's a wonderful sentiment, and I think that says it exactly right. There's a lot of problems there to solve, and you can solve them one at a time. But I want to develop problem solvers so that everyone, all of you, are out there solving problems, 15,000 a day, every time as you do your work. That means thinking about how we embrace and face reality. Not expecting things are going to be perfect, but recognizing, no, they're not perfect. There's a gap between the way things are and the way they wish we would be. So we want to become really, one skill we want to develop in ourselves, especially as leaders, is how to be a great questioner. So lean thinking really is question thinking. And here's a series of questions that we like to use a lot, and we develop ourselves in how to use these questions well. This is a talent, this is a skill that we need to develop. And here's a sequence. The first question always is what? What is going on? Grasp the situation. What is happening? When you go to the factory floor, when you go to the hospital floor, when you go to the development lab where engineers are developing things, what is really happening here? Then we can be diagnostic. Why is that happening? Why are we having 15,000 of those pulls a day? Then what if? We can prompt people to think about, what if we tried this? What if this happened? And then finally, really, why not? This is where we dream. I believe lean thinking is very much an aspirational sort of a system where we think about the way we want the world to be, recognize that it's not that way, that there's a gap, and then we can address and think together about how to close that gap. So that's why some of you have heard about the A3 process, which is a lean practice. That's what it's really all about. Not just a simple problem-solving tool or filling out a chart or filling out a form. It's about developing us as leaders in how to ask these questions, how to ask better questions. As a leader, how can I ask better questions? But to make all this work, it means we need to think about what employment is, what a job is. A lot of issues around jobs in the United States now, a lot of issues around jobs and employment around the world. Because in this world of uncertainty in the future, we can't guarantee. Even Toyota, when I joined them in Japan in 1983, there was never a guarantee of lifetime employment, never. Never a guarantee of employment tomorrow. We're here together every day to try to ensure our own employment security tomorrow. And the degree to which we can be successful depends on the degree to which we can work together to be solving problems. Never a promise about tomorrow because we do not know what tomorrow brings. This was in the 80s. I was working with a very senior Toyota executive. He was the executive vice president of production and engineering, which means he was in charge of the entire world global production. He had joined the company in 1946, right after the war. An amazing individual, very tough, very strong individual. And we were working on something, and he showed me this graphic. And I asked some questions about that graphic. I pushed back. What you see there, I don't know if you can see it very well, but you'll see the production volume as Toyota had increased its production over the years from 1955 up to, this was 1987 when I was working on this. And you see the number of employees. You see the number of production employees and the number of total employees, the number of vehicles. And what you see is the number of production employees stopped growing around before 1970. This is when the company was growing. The company continued to grow tremendously with the same number of production workers. So I said to him, does this mean we're making people work too hard? And he said to me, John, you don't have a clue. We're working smarter. There are different jobs for people to do. At the beginning, yes, we had to have one person building one car. But what we're doing now is we're working smarter. Now, what those jobs are going to look like today and in the future, we don't know, right? We don't exactly know. But we know that if we're developing thinking problem solvers, if we're developing everyone to be scientists, they can help figure it out. So that's what was happening here. That's what was happening here. So here's a thought. One of the things we do as Lean Institutes, the Lean Enterprise Institute, we put together venues very much like this. Once a year we do a summit with about this many people. We call it a summit, Lean Transformation Summit. We just finished ours in California a couple of weeks ago. Some of you were there. And next year we're going to be in Tennessee, my home state, my hometown. And we're thinking that we always like to think of a theme, just as there's a theme here today, a leadership in a VUCA world, which is a great theme. So we think it's going to revolve something around this, that I know a lot of companies in the U.S., a lot of leaders, and they bitterly complain to me that they can't find good workers and they don't have workers that are good enough and everything. I understand that. But I think this is a nice sentiment, that if you want better employees, try being a better employer. And if we think of what that means is not guaranteeing employment, we cannot do that. But if we think of it in terms of developing capability amongst everyone, that's something we can do. And then we'll see what the future brings. We'll face it adaptively together. We'll face it adaptively together. So this is kind of who we are. Again, there's a Lean Enterprise Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We are a spinoff of MIT. And we now have institutes in 24 countries. We expect there'll be more soon. A couple of things that we do. We have this a website. You're welcome to take a look at lean.org. Tons of stuff there. We have an online publication where we tell stories of lean success stories around the world. I'd welcome you to both read those, but also for everyone here to think about writing one. It's an open forum. It'd be wonderful if you can find some stories that you have, your own success story that you can actually contribute, because learning from each other, I believe, is a key for us to move forward. And in fact, learning from together is what we're doing here together with you. We began to ask ourselves at the Lean Enterprise Institute, the Lean Global Network, about 5 years ago, what could we possibly do that might be useful here in Singapore? And we didn't know. We began a series of visits here. So my predecessor, the founder, Dr. Womack, myself, Mark Wright, John O'Donnell, G. Kumar, others have been coming here just asking what we might do that could be helpful. And it's been a wonderful experience then to meet with our friends at the Singapore Institute of Technology and to be able to develop a program where we can learn together with the faculty of SIT, and then together also learn with you in these partnerships to try to make SMEs and all organizations and all people more resilient in the face of this VUCA, in the face of the volatility and the ambiguity and the complexity and the uncertainty that we all face, because that's not going to go away. We can't wish that it would go away. The wind comes in different directions and different speeds. And we can't do anything to change that. We can't stop the wind, but we can trim our sails. We can decide we're going to sail a different direction. And the more we are all rowing in the same direction with the same understanding, the more success we're going to have in going where we want to go, instead of just going where the winds will take us. Thank you very much for your time today.